that you are well, and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 7 English lesson on simple, compound, and complex sentences. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts, grade 7. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of simple, compound, and complex sentences. All right. So we see that our chapter is simple, compound, and complex sentences. Our subject is English Language Arts, grade 7. And the lessons that we're going to be focusing on under the chapter of simple, compound, and complex sentences is to identify dependent and independent clauses, and is the sentence simple, compound, or complex? Right, that is also the question that we are going to answer during the course of this lesson. And then later on, we're going to be doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. All right, so a clause, right? A clause is a group of words that contains both a subject as well as a predicate, right? That's a clause. And we said it contains both a subject as well as a predicate. All right. So we said a clause is a group of words that contains both a subject as well as a predicate, right? And when it comes to clauses, right, then we have independent clauses as well as dependent clauses, right? Independent clause, if you think of something or someone being independent, then you think of it being on its own. Dependent is all right. So we said we have dependent clauses and we have independent clauses, right? An independent clause can stand on its own, whereas a dependent clause, right, it basically needs an independent clause in order to latch on to, in order to create its own sentence or clause, right? So when we go to an independent clause first, right? An independent clause is a complete thought, and it can stand alone as a sentence. All right. So we said we have independent clauses and we have dependent clauses. We said an independent clause is a complete thought and it can stand alone as a sentence. Now we're going on to a dependent clause, right? And it is not a complete thought or not a complete thought, which means that it cannot stand alone as a sentence. An example of a dependent clause, it says, let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe. So if we look at examples of both independent as well as dependent clauses, right? Remember we said an independent clause can stand on its own, whereas a dependent clause cannot stand on its own to create a complete thought, right? All right. So also when it comes to a dependent clause, right? Remember we said a dependent clause cannot stand on its own. And a dependent clause actually needs either an independent clause in order for it to latch on to so that it can basically express a complete thought. And then we have a complex sentence, right? Complex sentences are made up of an independent clause as well as a dependent clause. All right. So when it comes to simple, compound, and complex sentences, right? Simple sentences, it basically consists of a subject, it consists of a predicate, and then that basically just needs to create a or express a complete thought, right? a need to express a complete thought by adding or by having a subject as well as a verb. All right. So when it also comes to simple, compound, and complex sentences, right? We spoke about the clause, right? And we said a clause is a group of words that contains a subject as well as a predicate. And then we have our two types of clauses, which is our dependent clause as well as our independent clause. And we made an example of a independent clause, right? We said an independent clause, it expresses a complete thought, it has a subject as well as a verb, right? It is basically where when you write a sentence, it has a verb, it tells us who or what we are discussing and the action that is being done. But when it comes to a dependent clause, right, like we said, it needs to latch on to an independent clause, right? It will have words, for example, like, let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe. All right. And then we have complex sentences, right? And we see the complex sentence is made up of an independent clause as well as as a dependent clause, right? And the dependent clause is a complex in a complex sentence usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. And remember, we also see that when it comes to subordinating conjunctions, right, it is words like although, as, because, before, since, right? That is a subordinating conjunction. All right, so let us go to A plus students.ca where we're going to be doing our tutorial, which is simple, compound, and complex. And we said a clause is a group of words. It contains both subject as well as a predicate. An independent clause, right, is a complete thought. It stands alone as a sentence, right? And a dependent clause is not a complete thought because it cannot stand alone as a sentence. And if you look at the differences between a independent clause as well as a dependent clause, for example, it says, let's pick up some sandwiches from Pete's Cafe. If we specifically look at that sentence is an independent clause because it can stand on its own. If we go to the next one, it says, after Kevin gets off work. So now the question is, what's going to happen after Kevin gets from work? Right? Which means that that is not a complete sentence and it's going to latch on to the independent clause. All right. Okay, so now it says select the dependent clause, right? It says Kendrick revised the notes for his presentation while he rode on the train to work. All right. So it says Kendrick revised the notes at his presentation while he rode the train to work. And the words that we would say is a dependent clause. It will be while he rode the train to work. So it's like the question is like asking, why would you just say while we rode to the train to pass the work? So now the question is what or who happened before then? Now we need to select the dependent clause. Until Carl took a sewing class, he couldn't even thread a needle. All right. And remember, we did say we have independent clauses and we have dependent clauses, right? All right. So once again, right, we said a dependent clause, an independent clause is a complete thought and it stands on its own. And then we have a dependent clause. And then we have a dependent clause. It cannot stand on its own and it does not express a complete thought, right? Let's go to our test. So now we're going to select the independent clause, right? And remember, an independent clause is a clause that can stand on its own. Although Tess had been running late all day, she still made it to the meeting on time. We need to select the independent clause. Is it although Tess had been running late all day, or she still made it to the meeting on time? Which one is the correct one? So we need to select the independent clause that can stand on its own. Is it option one, which says although Tess had been running late all day, or option two, she still made it to the meeting on time? All right, and if we were to select the independent clause, we will then choose the second one that says she still made it to the meeting on time. So that is an independent clause that can stand on its own. We need to select the independent clause, right? It says, after mom got a new job at the hospital, my older brother made out dinners for us. So an independent clause is an independent clause after mom got a new job at the hospital, or my older brother made dinner for us. Which one is the correct one? All right. And if we were to select the independent clause, we would say, my older brother made dinner for us. And the option is correct. We need to take a dependent clause. Remember, a dependent clause is all right. So dependent clause, right? Remember, we said the dependent clause is a clause that cannot stand on its own, right? So it says Brittany had never heard Farsi spoken until an Iranian family moved into her neighborhood. We need to select the dependent clause that is not capable of standing on its own. Either Brittany had never heard Farsi spoken, or until an Iranian family moved into her neighborhood. We need to select the dependent clause. All right, so if we select the dependent clause, says that Brittany had never heard Farsi spoken or until an Iranian family moved into her neighborhood. Let's go with the second option. All right. We need to now select a dependent clause. Once again, it cannot stand on its own. Before we moved to our new apartment, my sister and I shared a room. So we said we're going to select the dependent clause. It says before we moved to a new apartment, my sister and I shared a room. So now we need to select the dependent clause. Is it before we moved to a new apartment or my sister and I shared a room? What is our dependent clause? And if we were to select our dependent clause, right, and then we would say before we moved to our new apartment. That is our independent clause. Independent clause. Dependent clause, sorry, dependent. Now we need to select an independent clause, and an independent clause can stand on its own, right? It's got subject as well as a predicate. Although he may seem a little shy at first, Ernesto has an outgoing personality. We must choose either option one that says, although he may seem a little shy at first, or option two, Ernesto has an outgoing personality. All right. So are we going to say, although he might feel a little shy at first, or do we say Ernesto has an outgoing personality, even though he's shy? So we can say Ernesto has an outgoing personality. All right, last one. Select the independent clause. Because of Israeli cousins live halfway around the world, I don't know them very well. Because my Israeli cousins live halfway around the world, I don't know them very well. All right, so we say that because my Israeli cousins live halfway around the world, I don't know them very well, right? So we're going to say, I don't know them very well. That is the independent clause. It stands on its own. As Mitchell was reading about the giant squid, he took dialed notes about the animal's behavior. We need to select a dependent clause, a clause that can stand on its own. A dependent clause is it as Mitchell was reading about the giant squid, or he took detailed notes about the animal's behavior. All right. So now we're going to say, is a sentence simple, compound, or is it complex, right? And we said a clause is a group of words that contains both subject as well as a predicate. And then we have independent clauses as well as a dependent clause. And an independent clause is a complete thought and it can stand alone as a sentence, whereas a dependent clause is not a complete thought and it cannot stand alone as a sentence. All right. So we said with an independent clause, right, it expresses a complete thought and it can stand alone as on its sentence, whereas a dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence, right? Then a simple sentence, it is made up of a single independent clause, only single, only one independent clause, right? That's a simple sentence. And some simple sentences have introductory phrases, but the introductory phrase is part of the predicate. And then we have a compound sentence, which is made up of two independent clauses that is joined by a coordinating conjunction as well as and, but, or so. And then we also have a complex sentence that says it is made up of an independent clause and a dependent clause. All right. So we went over what a simple sentence is, independent clauses, dependent clauses, and we spoke about complex sentence. So now we're going to our test. Right? We're going to our test. So we're going to say which is a simple sentence, right? And a simple sentence is at option one, although it's snow all weekend, there was still not enough snow for skiing. So we now need to say which is a simple sentence, right? It says, although it snowed all weekend, there was still not enough snow for asking, or freedom of speech and trial by jury are two important rights in the United States Constitution. All right, and if we choose the correct simple sentence, you can say freedom of speech and trial by jury are two important rights in the South America in the United States Constitution. That is a simple sentence. It's got a single independent clause. So it says, which is a simple sentence? Is it in 1900 the US state with the large population was New York, or while Cherie was interviewing the governor, she uncovered plenty of information from her article? So we now need to say which is a simple sentence. A simple sentence. Remember, a simple sentence only has a single um clause, right? Is it in 1900 the US state with the large population was New York, or while Cherie was interviewing the governor? She uncovered plenty of information from her article. Ah, so simple sentence. I see. Now we're going to use a complex sentence. Complex sentence is made up of a subordinating conjunction as well as a independent clause. So complex in is it the unusual contraction had two levers, three rems, and no one and one metal basket. Or in the early morning, I drank my tea by a special stall as the Turkish bazaar came to life. We need to select our complex sentence. All right, we need to select another complex sentence, the last one. It says, which is a complex sentence? Erin dislikes radishes, so she always orders her salad without them. Or do we say, my assistant will distribute the report to everyone at the meeting while I make the introduction? All right. So when we look at our complex sentence, we can say Erin dislikes radishes, so she always orders her salad without them. Or do we say my assistant will distribute the report to everyone at the meeting while I make the introductions? Complex sentence. All right, so the second one is actually the compound sentence. The first one is a simple sentence, actually. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on simple, compound, and complex sentence. We said a simple sentence is made up of a single independent clause, all right? And we said we have an independent clause as well as a dependent clause. Dependent clause cannot stand on its own, whereas an independent clause can. All right, so that is the end of our lesson on simple, compound, and complex sentences. Thank you very much for joining the class. Till next time, goodbye.